And now on the line is Barry Grant from Extern Problem Gambling. Barry, welcome to the programme.
Hey Darren, thanks for having me back.
Okay, Barry, we did our first interview on Nair FM approximately 4 years ago, and this interview today is our 10th interview. And in large part, we have always talked in our interviews about gambling control legislation hopefully going to be brought in. I believe that there is positive news recently, isn't there?
Yeah, we saw the publication last week of the new Gambling Regulation Bill by Minister of State James Brown, which is quite a lengthy document. It's like 224 pages, which would establish a new Office of Gambling Regulator and sort of the rules around that, around the licensing of gambling and protections that could be put in place to protect vulnerable people from losing control of gambling or developing gambling problems or addictions, or how those things can be flagged in a systematic way. So there's a lot of very positive stuff in there. Obviously, we've been here before, 8 years ago with the 2013 Gambling Control Bill. So we're living in hope that this one is going to get over the line.
And the bill, assuming it becomes an act, it has a different name, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is the Gambling Regulation Bill. They may have wanted to differentiate it from the old one that never got enacted.
Okay. I don't expect you to go through every issue raised in the Act, but are there any areas, Barry, not covered in the legislation currently that you want to be covered?
Yeah, certainly we'd like to see something around things like loot boxes and other types of gambling mechanics that are appearing more and more in children's games. So people may be aware of things like FIFA would use loot boxes a lot, and essentially that's kind of a gambling style element where the person pays X amount of money. They don't know what's in the loot box. It could be Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi, but it's much, much more likely to be another player of a much lower value. And we've seen in Ireland and across the world reports of children maxing out their credit cards, trying to get the most desirable prize with these loot boxes. And even somebody was sending me something the other day. There's a new game in the App Store where kids can bet using virtual coins on football matches, and there's kind of a social media element to it. This is in a game that's for ages 4 and up, and even the app version of Uno, you can kind of play for virtual coins, and you can buy additional virtual coins. Like there's across the board, there's a lot more of this, what we would call gamblification of children's games. So I think that should definitely come under the remit of the gambling regulator.
Yeah, it's disgraceful what's going on, I believe, with children and sports as well. It's unbelievable. You have a couple more questions on the legislation, Barry, but just I know you're a full-time addiction counsellor, particularly dealing with gambling, people with gambling problems. I might have asked you this a few months ago in our last interview, but how would you describe how you're finding your work as an addiction counsellor over the last nearly 2 years since the pandemic? Is there much change? Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot busier, and also we're seeing a younger age profile of people seeking help, and we're seeing people who experience a kind of a rapid onset of gambling addiction. So most, previous to the pandemic, people making contact tended to be in their mid to late 30s. They've been gambling for maybe 10, 15, 20 years, and things have come to their head. Maybe they're having their first child, or they wanted to try and apply for a mortgage, things like that. And then they would seek help. But since the pandemic started, we're seeing people into their early 20s who might not have gambled at all before the pandemic, or gambled very moderately, kind of recreationally, and things spiraling out of control very, very quickly. I suppose that's the biggest difference we've seen in the last 18 months to 2 years.
Okay, we could talk about this all day, but okay, just a couple more questions. I read recently that the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive are planning on bringing legislation also, are they?
Yeah, so they published a bill for land-based gambling. They're aware that the online side of things is going to be complicated enough. So I suppose during the current mandate in Stormont, they wanted to get the land-based gambling legislation across the line, and then the plan is in the new mandate, which should be next year, that they would tackle the online elements of that. But they've actually, in Northern Ireland, there's been an all-party group in Stormont over the last year who've been getting testimony from the stakeholders across the board. I would have presented at one stage. I've attended, I think, about a dozen of them over the last year, and they really, really put a lot of work and thought and effort into working on this issue.
And you're saying there the online part of possibly dealing with legislation in Northern Ireland is complicated. Like, is there much hope to be confident in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland that online will be tackled? And games as well?
I think so. Yeah, I think there's a desire there to get this over the line now, and it's across all parties. You know, I don't see any of the major parties, north or south, who are against regulating gambling and putting improved control measures and safeguards in place. So I think that's across the board. So I don't see any party, north or south, who are against that. I think there's a strong push and there's a strong sentiment from the public as well. I think a lot of people are not particularly happy with the gambling industry, the level of advertising, the level of kind of gambling and normalization of gambling that's going on. So I think I am hopeful that both north and south we're going to see this legislation get over the line.
And your organisation, Extern, I believe, are an all-Ireland organisation, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So Extern started out in Northern Ireland just over 40 years ago, and have roughly 600 employees across the island of Ireland, across nearly 100 projects doing all sorts of different things, obviously including our small little project. But yeah, we provide supports to people in Northern Ireland. Obviously, we're doing that remotely, but we're doing it remotely in the Republic as well for the last year and a half. So yeah, it's great to have that, and it's great to have the support of our colleagues in Northern Ireland and the infrastructure that's there.
Okay, Barry, can you tell me when you expect the Gambling Regulation Act to be enacted? And maybe before you go, let us know if there is anything else about which you work with Extern at the moment that you want to tell our listeners about?
In terms of the Gambling Regulation Bill being enacted, the plan is that we will see a regulator up and running, operational, according to Minister Brown, by 2023. So we're looking at 12 to 18 months to get the legislation enacted, and then obviously the regulator has to employ staff and get, operationally get up and running. So hopefully 2023 we'll see that. I suppose with ourselves in Extern, one of the big things that we're doing at the moment is we're rolling out a schools education program that we got HSE funding for in 14 counties. So my colleague Tony O'Reilly is delivering those. I think he's got 25 schools booked in for that already. So that's great to be able to do that and to be in a position where we can provide that to schools for free. So that's a big new thing at the moment.
Okay.